Fishing like a local isn't just about catching fish. It's about connecting with the environment and the people who call it home. It's about hearing the stories and traditions that have been passed down for generations and sharing unforgettable moments with the people you meet along the way. Fishing like a local is having an experience that stays with you forever. And with Fishing Booker, you can experience it too, no matter where you are. Discover your next adventure on Fishing Booker.
I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, real quick before we get started on the show, I'm just going to talk about Treeline Academy. You've heard me say it. I can't even tell you how many times. Mark Livesey is treelineacademy.net. That's treelineacademy.net. Sign up. Use the promo code PC2020. Save yourself $20. Can't say it enough. It's awesome. Amazing. Most comprehensive e-scouting course out there. Check it out for yourself. Sign up. Use promo code PC2020. And now let's get to the show. All right. So I'm sitting here and I am talking to Hank Shaw. So Hank, can you go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody listening?
Well, hello everybody, and thank you for coming on the podcast, and I hope to not bore you guys to tears.
Oh, I highly doubt that. You know, looking back, it's kind of crazy. I remember stumbling. I knew who you were at the time, but I stumbled across your podcast when I first got into listening to podcasts way back, season 1, and it was some of my favorite episodes I ever listened to. So we'll kind of jump into those in the show that. Because it was just, we'll talk about it more. I don't even want to ruin it. I want to save it because it's pretty good stuff. Okay. But so can you kind of introduce yourself, I guess kind of in a nutshell, because there's so many aspects and angles of it, but can you introduce yourself for everybody listening if they don't know who you are?
Sure. Most people know me. Actually, most people don't necessarily know me, but if you Google anything that has to do with wild game or fish or seafood or wild edible plants or mushrooms, chances are you're going to come across Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook, which is the website that I run. And I have been running that since 2007. And for that website, I've been nominated for the James Beard Award twice, and I won it in 2013. So if you're not familiar with James Beard Awards, they are more or less the Oscars of the food world. So it was a pretty big deal to win that. And God, it's almost 10 years ago now. And the site has been going strong since then. It has helped me to write 5 cookbooks. Everything from Hunt, Gather, Cook, which is a little bit of foraging and fishing and hunting all in one book, to then much more specific books. My second book was all ducks and geese. It was called Duck, Duck, Goose. Third was about all things with antlers, venison and elk and pronghorn and moose and all that kind of stuff. And that was called Buck, Buck, Moose. After that, I hit upland birds and small game with pheasant, quail, cottontail. And my most recent book is Hook, Line, and Supper. And that is, as you might guess, everything that lives in the water. So kind of, if you can't buy it, that's what I'm interested in. So edible plants, wild mushrooms, fish and game, that kind of stuff. And I do quite a bit of reading and research, and I I end up writing a lot of articles on a Substack, which is called To the Bone. If you're not familiar with Substack, Substack is it's kind of an old school blog. Like if you remember blogs from the 2000s, this is more like that. And it's writing. It's everything that's not recipes, because Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook is all about recipes. I've got a podcast called Hunt, Gather, Talk, and been on a bunch of TV shows and all that kind of jazz. And I don't know, just trying to make a living.
Making a living. Probably better than being a political writer, right? I mean, that was the past life.
That was a former life. Former lives, I have two. One was as a political reporter, which I did that for about 18 years. And then I was also a restaurant cook, kind of a line cook and low level chef.
Yeah. So can you kind of tell everybody, because I've kind of heard it before once or twice, but like, what was the catalyst moment that made you, was it the writing of your book, or was there just a drive inside to get away from what you were doing and totally gravitate towards going forth with the cooking and writing the cookbooks and things like that?
So, like I said, I was a political reporter for 18 years. And I don't know if anybody out there has noticed, but politics in the United States has gotten quite a bit nastier over the last 20 years. And I don't know, maybe you haven't noticed, but things have just gotten very, very ugly. And I was there for the very beginnings of that turn. And I got into the job because when I started covering politics, it was all about people of differing ideas coming together to solve a problem. And so as a writer, what you write about is compromise and debate. Well, I can just leave that out there because there's very little compromise and almost no debate in modern politics. So it does not matter what your politics are. You could be to the right, left, or middle. It's inherently boring to write about that if you're a journalist, because it's just a bunch of people yelling at each other. There's no real compromise, no real debate, and it's just boring. So I've always been interested in wild foods, and I've been a gatherer of plants and an angler since before I could remember. And I've been hunting for 20 years, and I just thought, you know what, I should just write about this because it keeps me sane. You come home and take your suit off, you got to take a shower because everybody's been lying at you the whole day. and the idea of going out to hunt deer or going out to catch some fish or pick some mushrooms, it felt clean, and it still feels clean. And I do not miss my former life at all. Yeah, no, that's great. That's definitely a good feeling to be able to do that and get nature therapy as much as possible, and the real benefits of it really shine through. And I tell my wife all the time, she asks me and can kind of see when things are starting to weigh on me a little bit, and I'm like, I just need to get out. I need to go hunt morels or whatever it is in the season. And that's kind of what's so nice about being more than just a hunter, being a nature lover and observer, but actively partaking in it, taking something from it, but not necessarily taking away from it, but taking away something that's a memory, something spiritual, something that grounds you closer to that. And part of that is cooking those things, those gifts that you do receive and benefit from the outdoors as well. And you definitely shine in that area. So it's kind of good to talk to you about that, because now I'm kind of at the point in foraging and doing all these things to where I want to give it the respect that it deserves. I want to take it to that next level to where it's truly appreciated, not only by me, but others that I can share it with. Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate level of it is, for me at least, is I used to be a bit more like Alan, who you talked to just recently, in chefier things and pushing things to the boundaries. And there's another guy named Pascal Baldar who's very good at that. Yes. And I kind of have pulled back from that quite a bit I want to normalize a lot of these foods and make them less prancy, for lack of a term. Now, don't get me wrong. The chef in me really loves the prancy stuff because it's kind of cool. Yeah. But I end up cooking certain wild foods in 2 or 3 ways, and I'm kind of happy with that. I've cooked morel 6 ways to Sunday, and there's really only a few ways where I like to eat them at this point. And that's true with a whole lot of other things where take example of like spring greens, like lamb's quarters or amaranth or nettles or something like that. It's well, nettles are kind of an exception, but you know the well, yeah, because I'm just the dish I'm about to describe doesn't really work that well with nettles. So lamb's quarters is a great example. They live all over the place. Everybody's got them. I really just like throw them in a frying pan with some good olive oil. You hear them snap and popple, and you know as the cell walls break and they wilt. You throw some salt on them. Maybe you cook an onion with them, a little bit of chili, and maybe a splash of stock or wine or even lemon juice at the end. And it's super, super simple. And it's good on a tortilla. It's good on it with rice. It's good as a side dish. It takes 8 seconds to make. It's really good. And I just don't know. I mean, sure, I could do things, and I have done things a million ways to Sunday, but I just really like the simple more and more these days.
Simple is great. And I feel that way with meat so many times. And especially on social media, you see a lot of people and they post what they're doing with their wild game, especially venison. You always see people taking it and wrapping it in bacon or putting something on it that doesn't need to be on there. And it drives me absolutely nuts that everything needs to be covered in bacon, or they wrap goose breast in bacon because they don't like the taste of a goose breast. Well, it doesn't taste like chicken. It will never taste like chicken. It tastes like a goose. And each animal has its own unique flavor profile that you should come to love from that animal. And if you don't, probably don't hunt it because
exactly,
it's, you know, and to me, I don't want to say like an elitist or anything like that, but like a purist, that sometimes things in its purest form, its simplest form, is the best form because it brings that out. I totally agree with that about like nettles and things like that. And maybe it's because I'm just not that fancy anyway, but just giving it enough respect to where it tastes delicious and somebody else wants to eat it is my end goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take a lot of cues from Italian cuisine, Greek cuisine, Vietnamese, Japanese. There are a number of cuisines around the world that really put a premium on the quality of everything that goes on the plate. What's more so than, so I love Mexican. I love Mexican food a lot. But Mexican and French and Chinese food, none of those are really cuisines that rely heavily on 3 ingredients that you have to be perfect. Otherwise the dish is not going to be any good. You know, they're much more complicated cuisines. Whereas you find Italian or Greek, especially, where if let's just take a great example. So the Italian dish cacio e pepe, it's a very famous dish. All it is pasta, black pepper, cheese, and pasta water. That's it. And if you do it correctly, it all emulsifies and it is amazing. But if you were to do the same dish with crappy pasta, pre-ground black pepper, Parmesan cheese in a green can, first of all, it's not gonna work. Second of all, you're gonna be like, this is a terrible dish. Why would I do this? Because you just haven't really had it done correctly. And so that's a case where it's incredibly simple, but it is showing off by making something incredibly simple that shines. It's a little bit, I don't want to denigrate like complicated sauces like curries or a mole or anything, but I mean, man, if you have a good curry or good mole, you can put that on a bumper and it'll taste good.
Right.
Whereas if you've got something that's essentially naked, every little bit matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So one of the things that I kind of gravitated towards, and I alluded to it a little bit in the beginning of your introduction there, was your podcast and some of the first episodes. And the one that just stood out to me, and Hank, you're gonna think, is this guy crazy or something? But I've listened to it at least 3 times. Was the episode just you sitting there on the microphone talking about preparing fish?
Oh yeah.
Because in my household, it was prepared 2 ways. You either baked or broiled, and that to me counts as 1 because it's in an oven, or 2, you fried it. There was no real other preparation or anything like that. And I can recall the fish always, if you were the person cooking the fish, it would always be soggy. So like the tips that you gave there about putting it on a cookie sheet with a cooling rack on that cookie sheet, putting it in the oven to keep it dry and crispy and not get soggy, like that was an amazing episode. And I think you even introduced it as, hopefully you don't mind me rambling for the next half hour about how to cook fish, or maybe it was even an hour. I'm not sure. It was a long episode.
It wasn't even just frying fish. It was just frying fish.
Yes.
It wasn't even fish in
Yes.
general. It was just frying.
But the different ways and to think, because I was always looking for an alternative to like peanut oil or cottonseed oil or all those other oils that, everybody uses. And I was kind of looking for a different type or approach to that, and clarified butter. I mean, I've never heard of that. Maybe in other cultures or cuisines and restaurants and things, which you talked about in that episode, like that's something that happens. But I had never even thought of or heard of that. I mean, is that something that's like a common practice, or is that something in all cultures, or what?
Well, so to be clear, very, very, very few people deep fry in clarified butter. But if you use butter, you're going to fry in clarified butter, because you can't really fry in butter, because real butter's smoke point's like 260 degrees, and you can barely fry on that. It's just above the boiling point. It's because of the milk solids. So any culture that fries or that uses butter, Scandinavia, India, French, you clarify the butter so that it immediately jumps the smoke point up to about 350 degrees, which you can fry at 350 degrees. In fact, you should fry at 350 degrees.
Right.
So the presence of butter with good cooks, it's thrown in at the end, because those milk solids add a ton of flavor, and they brown well, and they taste great until they're burnt. So burnt butter is no good, and you want brown butter. So typically you're either going to saute in clarified butter or shallow fry in clarified butter. And then if you want that butter flavor, because you're already going to get it with the clarified, but if you want that real richness, you throw in a knob or two of butter in the last 2 or 3 minutes of cooking.
Yeah. And I've done that, and I've followed your recipe, and it actually turned out great, except for my batter tends to get a little bit soggy, but I try to get away from any type of traditional grains when I was doing it, and I found.
Are you talking a batter or breading?
Like a breading.
Okay.
Yeah, not batter.
Your breading should be fine, and your breading should be fine in clarified butter. Batter's no good. Batter needs like 360, and that's above the ability of even clarified butter.
Okay. Yeah. And then I've tried other oils that didn't work as good as, oils if you were deep frying either too. Like if you're going to do that and actually use an actual batter, it didn't. I don't know. It always, for some reason, it seems like it soaks up too much grease still. And I'm thinking
it's your oil's too cold.
Too cold. Yeah. Yeah. So I need to work on my game for that for sure a little bit. But and one of the things,
that is one of those things where people just get super scared. Like, oh my God, the oil's 350 degrees. Oh my God, it's 360 degrees. Stuff, get the fire department. Like, no, that's when you start frying.
Yeah.
And what you do is in between batches, you let the oil get back to 350 or 360 before you put anything else in. So this is the other thing. Like people like, oh yeah, it's 350, and they throw their stuff in, and they either throw too much in, and that drops the oil temperature to 300, like in a heartbeat, which that's no good. Or they do the right thing and they fry things in batches, and then they're done with a batch, and then they throw the next batch in before the oil gets a chance to get back up to temperature. And then the first batch is great. Second batch is soggy. Third batch is still soggy because you're still not doing the same thing. And by the time you get a chance to eat it all, the first batch is soggy because it's been sitting around forever.
Right. Which is a good trick, though, that you mentioned by putting it in the oven like that, because I'd never thought of that. Normally, what do? You unroll a newspaper, set a newspaper down, even though that's not even really a thing anymore, hardly. But newspapers are kind of a thing of the past. But that's kind of what you do, right? And you set it on the paper, and everybody picks at it, and by the time you get around to it, it's all cold and soggy. So that was probably one of the greatest tips that I'd never even known, was to throw it in the oven like that and keep it warm.
Happy to help.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to try cooking a whole fish, but the idea of it to me is kind of, I don't know, scary, obscure, something
Well,
out of.
how would you like to cook it?
Well, one of the things that I saw that was pretty cool that you've done was the Szechuan crispy fried carp.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I've always wanted to try that, but never had the courage to make that dish. And then you even talked about suckers and some other things. Is a sucker like a common fish that you've used for that dish, or is that something?
It is actually. So that dish is I have two Asian whole fried fish recipes. One for something like, if you're in the Midwest, something much closer to like a walleye or a smallmouth bass. Really smallmouth bass is kind of your archetypical shape and size of a typical fried fish. And that's where you want to fry the fish and you care about the fish. So the other method, which is what you're talking about, is when you have an exceptionally bony fish. So like a sucker or a small carp or anything that's got maybe a pickerel or a very small pike or something that's got an extra set of bones. So with that fish, the end point is just crispy. It's you slash the fish perpendicular to the backbone a bunch of times and you fry the crap out of it.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it softens those little bones. And so what you're left with is just crispy, crispy, crispy. And you serve it, you pour either sizzling chili oil over it or some other sauce, and then you eat it right away. And it stays crispy and it's amazing. So that dish is on the cover of Hook, Line, and Supper, my fish book. I like it so much.
It looks amazing, and I just haven't had the courage to do it, and I don't know why I haven't.
You need a fish that will fit in a wok. You need a wok.
You need a wok. So,
I mean, you could do it in a frying pan, but you need a lot more oil in that. There's no reason not to do it in a frying pan, except for you're using more oil. And you just need to be courageous enough to have 350 degree oil raging away for a good, 5 to 8 minutes per side. And you need a fish that fits in that pan. You don't want it real. I mean, you can hang over a little bit in a wok, but not in a frying pan. And you also have to be patient enough to not dick around with it and let it fry for on each side so that it really is crispy. Yeah.
So when you're doing that, it's not actual scales on it, right? You descale the fish, you scale the fish,
Correct.
and then it's just pretty much the skin left.
Yeah, and the fins.
And the fins, okay.
Because the fins get so crispy, crunchy that you can sit there and eat them. The tail tastes like a potato chip.
That's interesting. And I've seen other people do that, especially with I think it's like the walleye cheeks or something they call them. And they do it with
that's cheeks. That's different.
But they
that's
fry them up like a chip. Yeah.
I mean, you could. That would be really a hell of a lot of. But you see it a lot with bluegill tails.
Okay. Yeah. So, I've got a friend that uses suckers, and he's trying to get me to dip net them with them. And he says they're amazing. And one of the things he does is pressure cans them, which pretty much eliminates the bones, turns them soft.
Sure.
And then he uses them in a bunch of different recipes, like casseroles and things like that. But I'm kind of curious now. I'd like to try and get some suckers and try the crispy fried, sucker instead of with some Szechuan type sauce on it.
There's another method that I use with shad, with American shad, and this works really well with suckers. And it's funny because it's a case of kind of convergent evolution, where and this involves fillets. So in Japan, there's a fish called a pike eel, which, like a sucker, has lots of little bones in it. It's like extra sets of bones. So what they do is they take the fillet of the fish, which obviously has many bones in it, and they use a very sharp knife to make perpendicular cuts. So they're cutting top to bottom of the fish, not lengthwise. Perpendicular cuts over and over and over and over and over again on the meat of the fillet, keeping the skin on. The scales are off, but the skin is on. The skin is what holds this together. And then what they'll do is, depending on the size of the fillet, they'll either cut the fillet into big chunks, or they'll just say screw it and fry the whole thing if it's a small fish. And what happens is when you either tempura fry it, you typically in Japan you would tempura fry it, and you drop it into the hot oil, and now we're talking like 360-degree oil. It goes, and then the skin contracts, and the meat opens up, and so all the slashes you made, it opens up with the batter, and it eliminates the bones. It's crispy, and it's beautiful. It looks like a peony flower. Now, the people who clearly had no knowledge of this, but figured out the same thing, are people in the Ozarks. So in the Ozarks, they do the exact same thing with suckers, except they don't use tempura; they use a cornmeal batter, and it works the same way.
Really? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that definitely sounds like it needs to be.
It's super good.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that like you do with those types of fish other than those two, or is that pretty much like a staple way to prepare those?
Bony fish are very good smoked, because there's a lot of dishes that you can do with flaked smoked fish.
Like I think I saw something you posted recently about that. You made
like a trout dip.
Right? Yeah.
Trout dips are a common one. I've got a recipe for Vietnamese smoked fish salad, where it's just Vietnamese flavors with flaked smoked fish. I've done that with shad. You can poach it and then flake out the meat away from the bones, and then use that for like a tuna fish salad.
Nice. That's definitely something that's good. So I had another question for you, and I've seen that you've done it, and it turns out perfectly, or at least it looks so in the pictures. But smoked venison, like a roast beef. Mm-hmm. I've tried smoking venison, and I don't.
Hard to keep it lit.
So I've tried smoking it on a smoker, and I've never. It's always come out pretty tough. And like,
what cut are you using?
So typically I use like a hindquarter roast, or sometimes even like a front shoulder.
Okay. So front shoulder is never going to work unless that's the first step in subsequent cooking. So it's never going to get tender, just not. However, there's a great number of dishes that if you smoke a shoulder first, or a neck, and then braise it until it's tender, that works really well. But what you're talking about is a hind leg roast. And what you really want is a single muscle roast. So there you minimize connective tissue. And if you do that, then it shouldn't be tough at all, because you're dealing with a clean muscle that you're basically cooking it like a California tri-tip. And that a tri-tip is California's contribution to barbecue, in the sense that tri-tip is a particular cut of beef. And the goal with tri-tip is to get it to medium as slow as possible over a very smoking fire. So you're still essentially eating roast beef, but it's been smoked for hours, and has Santa Maria tri-tip has a very specific spice rub on it. But the point is the same, where if that's your goal, is to have a nice roast beef, or venison in this case, if you have a single cut of meat, not multiple, like the football roast, the sirloin, that football roast that one's a hard one to do this with, because there's inherently a bunch of connective tissue in it, and it's not terrible, but it's not your ideal roast in the hind leg. It's just big, and a lot of people use it.
So would you like the eye of the round or something from the back?
You could do eye round, but eye rounds are really kind of tenderloiny on a deer. I would use the other two. I mean, you end up with 3 big roasts, the eye round, and a bunch of stew meat, basically, when you take apart a hind leg.
Right.
And so there's a football roast, and then the two whose name is, I can't remember the official names of those particular roasts, but you end up with 2 other kind of trapezoidal rectangular roasts those are the ones you want to do this with.
Okay. Yeah, because I've always done that, and it's just, and I've actually used, I don't know what they're called either, but I've used those. I've used the football type roast, and even the eye of the round on it, and played around and smoked it, and ended up putting it in the crock pot to soften it. And I'm thinking maybe I just didn't do it long enough. Like a lower heat longer than
Well,
what I
what
did.
heat are you talking about? Like, I mean, I will do that at like 185 to 200,
I was
and
thinking
I'll just
probably like 240 or something, somewhere in there.
It's too hot.
Yeah.
It's too hot. You're not getting enough smoke time, and you also have to watch that internal temperature like a hawk. So I've got an internal probe thermometer that will tell me what the internal temperature is. And when you have a very large roast like that, you have an enormous amount of carryover heat, because carryover heat is a function of two things. One, how hot is being cooked, and this is not a problem when you're doing what we're talking about because we're working with low heat. But the other factor is how big the roast is. So the bigger the roast, the more carryover heat you're going to have. But the lower the temperature, the lower the carryover heat you're going to have. So in this case, you still have to account for 5 degrees ish, even though you're cooking it very low, very cool. Whereas if you had cooked that roast at 400, you might have to pull it at 110 or 115 because it's going to have so much carryover heat. Once you let it rest for 15 or 20 minutes, then it will be medium rare. Do you follow?
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. That's something I'm going to have to play around
meat
with
science
this weekend. Yeah, meat science. I love meat science. It's a wonderful thing. And like I said, being able to do that and respect the animal and do that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I can't stand taking my animal to somebody else to cut it up. I want to take pride in cleaning the entire animal the way I want it prepared, whole muscle groups, trimming, taking time to trim off all the silver skin, the pieces of tendon, everything. So it's mine and I'm able to use it the way I want to use it and prepare it.
Yeah, I mean, butchering is it's an intimate act on a number of levels, and not the least of which is it's idiosyncratic to what cuisines you cook. I mean, if we were in Mexico, we're going to butcher it differently than we're going to do in the United States, and if we're in the East, we're going to butcher it differently than in the West. And French do it different, Italians do it different. It's you cut meat based on how you're going to cook it.
Yeah. Yeah, I always do whole muscle groups. That's my new thing that I've been doing, and trying to utilize those whole muscle groups in a dish or something that I can do with that. And one of the things I've been trying to do, obviously not successful yet, to get a perfect roast beef out of it, but that's something I'm working on.
The other thing is with this roast beef project is just slice it thin. It's like goose breast. I mean, you could cook goose breast perfectly, but if you slice it wide like a mallard, it's gonna be tough. Remember, think roast beef is sliced thin. So slice your venison thin when it looks right.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing too. Some of the things I've done probably are a little bit thicker. I've almost wanted to get a meat slicer just to slice it so I can get it super thin. So kind of curious about a few other things that always make me wonder, and I think I might know the answer to the question, but I definitely want to know your take on it. But what do you think is like the most underrated game animal out there?
Every day when we're on the road, people around us endanger themselves and others by using their phones while driving. They think they're hiding it, but we've all seen them and know exactly who they are. For instance, there's a sneak-a-peeker who darts their eyes between the road and their text. There's also the got a ticketer, looking upset because they just got a ticket for using their phone while driving. And what about the fast scroller who can't drive 5 minutes without updating their social media feeds? Or the night lighter who has that mysterious glow illuminating the inside of their car after dark? Do any of these sound familiar? If they remind you of yourself or someone you know, rethink your behavior before you find yourself becoming the fender benderer, the veering off the roader, or worst of all, the driver who killed someone. Put the phone away or pay. Paid for by NHTSA. After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by overpriced wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I heard that for a limited time, all Mint Mobile wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they sell wireless service online. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
There's a lot of them. But I would think the animal that is the best, that the most people say is the worst, is duck.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, because there are so many duck hunters that if I had $1 for every time I heard someone like, I love hunting them, but I sure hate eating them, or like, you can make a duck taste good, I'll give you $100. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, dude, I literally wrote the book on the subject.
Yeah.
And it's like, everyone's got a venison recipe. Everybody has something they can do with a pheasant breast. Everything knows what to do with a wild turkey breast, but there are enormous numbers of hunters out there who just don't know what to do with ducks, except like jerky, you know, or like snack sticks. And I mean, if you make snack sticks out of like a pintail or a canvasback, somewhere an angel dies. I mean, that's just,
Yeah.
that's just horrible. I mean, it's so I still maintain that duck is the most abused, really amazing game meat in America.
Yeah. I'll agree with that. I actually thought you were going to say squirrel, but
Oh no. If you hunt squirrel, you like squirrel. I don't know anybody who hunts squirrels who doesn't like to eat them.
well, yeah, okay, that's true. I just meant like underrated as in like not enough.
Oh, by the American public?
Yes, but like not enough people hunt it.
Oh, I would agree with you. I think civilians have this notion that squirrels are horrible and disgusting, and they're among the finest tasting game meats in America.
Yeah, so
I think everybody who hunts them knows that.
Most of my squirrel is either braised or in a crock pot, though. Am I missing out? Am I missing out on something?
Not really, because squirrels can be 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old. So if you are in a squirrel rich environment and you get kits, you know, young of the year squirrels, those are really good fried. But unless you're going to do the 2-step, which is to say a fricassee. So a fricassee is where you fry a squirrel or something, and then you simmer it in a gravy until it's tender. That's a thing that if you haven't done a fricassee, that's worth your while.
Yeah, I have not actually. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more? I'm just kind of curious on how that.
Sure, yeah, it just is what it is.
Just great, straight up simmer it in a gravy. Like, are you making like a thinner gravy, or are we talking like a white gravy?
It's a thinner
or a
gravy
tomato
that
gravy?
thickens as it cooks. So there's a recipe in Pheasant Quail Cottontail for it, actually. But it's basically, the gist is that you bread or flour or both the thing, you know, squirrels in this case, and then you fry it, and then you drain off most of the oil, and then you remove the fried thing, and then you cook some onions and garlic and maybe some other vegetables in it, but usually onions. And then when those are nice, you put, you know, you make you've got some stuff in the pan still from the breading, and you make that into the base of like a roux for a sauce. So it starts as a pretty thin gravy, and then you put the meats back in, and then you let it cook down. And so if you've done it right, the squirrel would be tender at the same time the gravy is the right consistency. Now that's tricky. You have to do it many times to get that right, but you can always adjust a gravy if it's too thick or too thin.
Yeah. That seems like pretty simple then. When you're, how or what point do you think in order to get it right to where you put it in? I mean, what are you looking for when you put the meat back in to try and get it to finish at the same time?
Oh, well, I mean, you put the meat back in immediately, because squirrels routinely take 90 minutes to 2 hours to get really tender. So I mean, for me, I'm gonna let it simmer at a decent level. I'm not a royal boil, but let it simmer fairly energetically for about 90 minutes or so. So you actually want a good inch of liquid over the squirrels with an open pot. and then let it cook down.
Okay, that's just what I was going to ask you. So you're not going to cover it at any point, then it's going to be an open.
You could, I mean, if it's cooking down too fast, you cover it or cover it partially. I mean, that's just cooking.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things can you talk about? I don't know, but we talked earlier, and you said you love cooking Mexican cuisine, and I believe that's something that's coming up, right?
Yeah, don't hold your breath, because it's a bit of a departure. Because while there will be fish and game and wild food recipes in this book, it is not focused on that. It really is focused on the cuisines of the north of Mexico. And I'm co-writing it with my friend Patricio Wise, who's from the north of Mexico. And it's a project that's going to require a lot of time, a lot of patience. My Spanish has to be better. I mean, I can get around in Spanish pretty well, but I'm not fluent. And that is a process that takes time. And, it has to be right, and it can't be rushed. It has to be a book where someone from Sonora or Tamaulipas or Coahuila or Baja looks at the book and says, yep, you got all that, you hit all the main bases. And then the goal beyond that is for someone from one of those states to see some recipes where, like, I'll be damned, you figure that one out, or I didn't even know that existed. And so there's this, it's a pretty daunting project. It's going to be a fairly substantial book. And we are right now, the plan is to print it in both English and Spanish. So it's not going to be this year, put it this way, but
okay.
But it's something it means a lot to me. And there's so much intersection in Mexican cuisine. This is why I love it so much. It scratches all the itches where there's a lot of wild food in Mexico. There's whether it's mushrooms or wild herbs or fruits or game or fish. And there's a lot of really exciting things that they grow in gardens too, that they're just like, all of the best things in your garden are from Central America, like corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, peppers. All of the cool stuff is from there. So it's one of these deals where, like, you talk to anthropologists and, like, well, the corn, beans, squash, and chilies and tomatoes, they spread across North America very quickly when they were, well, duh, right? Because they're awesome, right? Could you imagine being like, I don't know, Ojibwe, and you had none of those, and then you find some dude who'd been hanging out in Mexico who's got seeds for all this, and like, dude, you need to try this, and you'll try it, and you'll be like, where have you been all my life, right?
Right.
Yeah. So of course it's going to be widely adopted. I mean, they're amazing products, and it's got all of that, and it's so diverse. And there's 32 states in Mexico, and there are legit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major culinary regions where food is significantly different from each other. It's a bit like Italy in that sense, where everyone knows North and South, and you could do North and South in Mexico too, but you really can't actually in Mexico. It's North, South, and then the Mayans. So you've got 3 mega cuisines in Mexico, whereas you really don't have that in Italy. You've got lots of differences state to state and region to region. And it's nothing like the United States. I mean, it's the closest would be to take Minnesota hot dish and compare it to Cajun food. That would be a similar difference.
That's a pretty big difference. So I'm kind of just like wondering though, is there going to be any type of like wild game in that recipe book, or is it pretty much like traditional dishes?
Well, some traditional dishes are wild game.
Okay.
So, and because the only thing that you're going to see a lot more of that I don't normally cook right now is regular pork and regular chicken. Everything else is pretty much like the beef and venison in pretty much, not every, but pretty much every Mexican dish, beef and venison are interchangeable. And to some extent, pheasants and chickens are going to be interchangeable. So having done this from the wild side for so many years, it is super easy to tell a reader who has been reading me all along, let's say you had the other 5 cookbooks, you buy this one, you're not going to be left behind. Like, you're not going to just see supermarket meats. And if you're going to see something that's listed as chicken, I'm going to tell you how to do it with grouse or pheasants or whatever, because that's also important to me.
Yeah, no, that's very nice. One of the things I got to ask you, and I hope you don't get mad, but have you ever thought about, or is there something in the works maybe at some point where your first cookbook ever gets re-released with color pictures?
God, I wish. I'm not gonna get mad. So that book is now 11 years old, and I don't control it. I'm in kind of limbo hell with that book. So Hunt Gather Cook came out in 2011, and Rodale owns it. Rodale was then sold to Random House, and it's still selling. It's still in print. So I mean, I get royalty checks twice a year from it, and not large ones, but people are still buying it to some extent. But it's up to them to decide whether they want a 10th anniversary edition or whatever. Normally it's not uncommon to go, if you go 10 years, to do a 10th anniversary update.
Yeah. That was one of my biggest detractors from
I don't have the ability.
It really bummed me out when I opened it up and I started looking at it, and I'm like, oh, because I mean, the dishes are amazing dishes, but
it's not just color. It's like, I mean, think about yourself 11 years ago.
It's pixelated. It looks like you took it with a flip phone, cell phone, with like the first generation of camera, maybe, but
not that bad.
But
it's not pixelated. It's just, you probably have the soft cover, and the soft cover images look like crap because the paper's terrible, and like they're all done with real cameras. But the problem is, I mean, just think about yourself 11 years ago. How much more about the things that matter to you now than you did 11 years ago. It's crazy. It's like, it's not totally the same thing, but it's not unlike going from graduate school and count 11 years back to what did you know?
True.
You're a 7th grader,
Yeah. Yes.
So
I will agree with
it's
that.
not like it's not like I didn't know my shit in 2011 or 2010, really, when I wrote the book, but I know so much more now that I would love an opportunity to revise that book, but it's not up to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't know that, and now I do, but that was one of the things I'd love to see that book in color. I really, and I guess you do too. So that works out that way. I got to ask you though, like, what right now are you focusing on as far as like foraging stuff to try and find with spring and all these different things to make some great dishes? What are you really looking for?
Spring's a crazy time because so much happens at once that you can't do it all. And you just kind of have to pick and choose. And it's also a very busy time in the garden. And then fishing is kicking up, and turkeys, and it's you can get kind of burnt in a sense, where like, oh my God, it's perfect for this. Oh my God, it's perfect for that. But morels are just starting for us, because our morels exist in the High Sierra, and so they don't even really start typically until they're 4,000 feet. And they're around 5,000 right now, and they'll continue to climb up the mountain all the way up to 10,000 by July. Nettles are done. Now there's one spot I can find nettles at altitude, but they're pretty much done. That's like a early spring thing. Wild onions are done here in the valley, but I can chase them up the hill. That's a cool thing. You can chase things up in elevation, and you can also chase things north face to south face.
That's one of the things I'm jealous of, Hank, is like, people that live near mountains. I have a friend that says the same thing. He's like, oh yeah, we start at 6,000 or 5,000 feet for picking morels, and we follow them all the way up, living in Colorado. And it's like, man, ours are done. And when they're done, and that's it. You can't keep going. Yeah.
So what for us right now, the other thing that's hot right now is elderflowers. Elderflowers are everywhere right now. And so I got to get on it because there's some elderflower recipes that I want want to do and revise. Wild greens, lamb's quarters is out of control right now, and that might be my favorite wild green to eat. And then it's purslane shows up when it gets hot, and it hasn't been hot yet, so it's here, but it's still not. It's still pretty small. Trying to think of other things that are big right now. We don't really have any early fruit. The earliest stuff for us are loquats, and that's a imported Chinese tree but it's just a landscaping tree all over the region that you can just kind of pillage. Wild plums will show up by Memorial Day. They're here, but they're just not ready yet. See, spring porcini mushrooms are just starting, like just starting. I found my first one a couple days ago.
Oh man, that's wonderful.
And you can chase them all the way up the hill too. And then there's a dirty little secret. We can get fall porcini in August if you go way at the top of the mountains.
Sounds like fun.
Like
challenge accepted.
It can be fun. It can also be pretty challenging.
Yeah,
like they're right below the tree line, so they're like right where the trees end.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's great though. I mean, that you can follow them like that. Like I said, I'm so jealous of people that get to follow elevation for doing that. That's like such an addition, a bonus to the season, when you can just keep following it like that. One of the things that Nopales
is another thing that's a big spring deal.
What's that?
So the prickly pear cactus paddles.
Oh, okay.
Not the fruit. The fruit comes late, but these are the paddles.
So how do you prepare the paddles? And pretty much in like the same, you're not steaming and juicing them or doing things like that what are you doing with the paddles then? Like cutting them and making?
So they're very, very common ingredient in Mexican cuisine. And so you cut them off, you grab tongs and you cut them off, and you cut off all the spines. I've got a video for that on YouTube if you're interested.
I think I've seen it.
And so you cut off all the spines, and then there's lots of ways to cook them, but you have to prep them. Otherwise it is a slime fest. And I mean, they're great once you deal with they call it babas. But once you deal with the slime, they're fine. So there's a way to do it when they're raw, and then mostly you boil it out of them. You can also bake it out of them, but once you do, they're kind of like a cooked green bean with a little bit of a tart citrusy taste to it.
Nice. That's like one of the things I saw, and I find it so crazy, is how you brought up lamb's quarter quite a bit, and that during war efforts, there was pamphlets that would go out about common weeds that you could eat as greens, and one of them that was on there was lamb's quarter, and how quickly we've forgotten that you can eat that, and people just spray it, and it boggles my mind that people want to eradicate something that you can just so easily pick and eat it, and it's so good.
And not only that, so agriculture originated in a bunch of places all over the world independently, and there was an eastern United States agricultural complex in antiquity. And so all of the native groups that were north of the Rio Grande and east of the Mississippi, those groups had their own set of cultivated plants that they farmed before some dude showed up with corn, beans, and squash. And lamb's quarters was one of those plants.
Really? I didn't know that. But that's kind of like, I was just listening to another podcast, and they were talking a little bit about Cahokia, the mountains here in Illinois, down in southern Illinois.
Those guys.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, those guys.
And they were actually talking about grass too, different grasses that they had and utilized. And
yeah, there's a little barley.
Maygrass.
It's called little barley, and then the maygrass is the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to learn about all that kind of stuff.
Well, their champion plant besides lamb's quarters is Jerusalem artichoke. That's from that whole group.
Yeah, what an amazing, to think that it predates what they thought was actual farming, and they tended all these different plants and utilized them so well. Hank, it's been great, and I appreciate you coming on and talking about all these wonderful things and educating me on hopefully how to make a perfect venison roast beef. And and I'll let you know how it turns out. Before we go, though, can you tell everybody once again where they can find you, all your amazing stuff, and
Sure.
and look for you?
So on social media, I'm most active on Instagram, where I am at Hunt Gather Cook. I do run a Facebook group called Hunt Gather Cook as well, so you can find me there. I run a podcast called Hunt Gather Talk, and that is available on, well, wherever you find your podcasts. My website is Hunter Angler Gardener Cook, and you can find that at huntgathercook.com. And finally, I do, if you're interested in kind of the big thoughts and kind of articles and hunting ethics and stuff that's not just recipes, you will find me over at To The Bone, which is a Substack newsletter.
All right. I appreciate it. And once again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.